For John, it was just an ordinary day, but not so ordinary at the same time. After all, when does a random day actually step off the page and turn into a story? John drove his old car through the rain-soaked streets of the city. It was a faded blue Beetle, the kind that seemed to have more stories to tell than its owner. He worked as a gardener, the guy who mows lawns, trims trees, and does the kind of work no one really notices until everything looks nice again. And he liked it. He liked getting his hands dirty with soil, watching plants grow over time. But there was no denying it. Money was tight. Very tight. The rain poured down, and the windshield wipers made that rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound. John thought about the electric bill he needed to pay and the gas tank that was practically running on fumes. Just another day, he muttered to himself, trying to push away the heavy feeling of worry. And that's when he saw her. At the bus stop, under a flimsy awning that barely shielded her from the downpour, stood a pregnant woman. She was holding 2 oversized grocery bags, struggling against the wind that kept trying to snatch them from her hands. She looked exhausted, uncomfortable, and the bus she was waiting for was nowhere in sight. John slowed down, glancing at her through the rear-view mirror. "Man, that's just not right," he said aloud. Now, here's the funny thing about John. He never thought too hard before doing something good. It wasn't a matter of strategy or calculation. He just acted. So, without a second thought, he pulled over to the curb and rolled down the window. "Hey, ma'am. Need a hand?" Emily, that was her name, looked up, surprised. Her eyes were filled with exhaustion, but there was also a flicker of relief at the sight of someone offering a helping hand. "Oh my God, would you really? I've been waiting for the bus, but it hasn't come in almost an hour." "This weather's crazy today," John replied, smiling as he pushed open the passenger door. "Come on, I'll give you a ride home. Those bags look way too heavy to be carrying around." Emily hesitated for a second, but then climbed into the car, thanking him with a shy smile. As they drove, they talked. She told him she was pregnant with twins, 2 at once, can you believe it? And that her husband, Robert, was away on a business trip. He was supposed to be back today, but the meeting ran late. "So, I'm dealing with this mess alone." John chuckled, shaking his head. "Life's full of surprises, huh? But you're handling it. Everything's gonna be just fine." When they reached her house, Emily insisted on giving him a tip, but John refused. "No way, ma'am. I just did what anyone would do." He gave her a quick wave and got back into his car, completely unaware that that small choice would change his life in ways he couldn't even imagine. As he drove home, John felt something strange in his chest. It wasn't exactly happiness, but something close to purpose. As if that simple gesture had touched something bigger, something he couldn't quite understand yet. But, of course, that part of the story is for later. Because sometimes, life likes to save its best moments for when we least expect them. The next morning began with a clear sky, as if the storm from the night before had been nothing but a dream. John woke up early, as he always did, and went straight to the backyard. He had a simple routine: black coffee, buttered bread, and a good hour dedicated to his plants. It was there, among the green leaves and the scent of damp earth, that he could think more clearly. And that morning, his thoughts were on Emily. "Lucky I ran into her," he murmured under his breath as he watered the daisies. But then, something strange happened. A piercing, almost deafening sound tore through the peaceful air. It was as if the sky itself was being invaded by some kind of giant machine. John dropped the hose and looked up, confused. What the hell is that? Shielding his eyes with his hand, he spotted a helicopter. Yes, a helicopter, hovering over his house. The aircraft descended slowly, kicking up a cloud of dust and dry leaves. John stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Is this actually real? He thought, blinking several times to make sure he wasn't still groggy or imagining things. When the helicopter finally landed, a figure stepped out. A tall man, well-dressed, with a smile that seemed to be hiding something. "You must be John," the man said, walking toward him with confident strides. His voice was calm but carried an authority that made John feel slightly uneasy. "My name is Robert. I'm Emily's husband." John blinked again, trying to process the information. "Wait, what? What do you mean? He scratched his head, still holding the hose like it was some kind of shield against the absurdity of the situation. Robert let out a short, controlled laugh. I know this seems crazy, but I needed to thank you. Emily told me everything you did for her yesterday. You may not have realized it, but she really needed that help. Oh, that. It was just, something anyone would do when they see someone in trouble. No big deal. John shrugged, trying to brush off the awkwardness. He wasn't used to getting visits, let alone from helicopters. But Robert wasn't just there to say thank you. He pulled an envelope from the inner pocket of his suit and handed it to John. This is for you. It's a job offer. I'd like you to come work for me. At my company. John opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at the envelope like it was a bomb about to go off. Work for you? But I'm a gardener. I don't know anything about companies, business, any of that stuff. Exactly, Robert replied, his eyes glinting with something unreadable. You have something that a lot of people out there lack. Character. I need people like you by my side. People who aren't caught up in power games or easy money. People who know what's right. Those words made John hesitate. A mix of pride and suspicion stirred inside him. And what exactly would the job be? You'll be working on a special project. Something new, something important. We'll talk about the details later. But first, Robert paused dramatically, as if carefully choosing his next words. First, I need you to sign a confidentiality agreement. That's necessary because, well, let's just say some things are delicate. John frowned. This was starting to sound strange. Very strange. Confidentiality? Why? What kind of project is this? Robert smiled again, but this time there was something different about it. Let's just say you'll find out soon enough. Trust me. Trust. That was the key word here. John looked down at the envelope in his hands, then at the helicopter behind Robert, and finally at the man standing in front of him. He knew this decision would change something in his life. But what, exactly? As he pondered, John felt a light breeze brush against his face. It was as if the wind itself was trying to tell him something. Maybe it was just his imagination, or maybe it was a sign. Either way, he knew he couldn't just say no. Not completely. All right, he finally said. I'll do it. But on one condition. Robert raised an eyebrow, intrigued. A condition? What is it? If I take this job, I still want to help people. My way. I don't want to become just another pawn in this giant chessboard you call a company. For a moment, Robert was silent. Then, he let out a genuine laugh, as if that answer was exactly what he had expected. Deal, he said, extending his hand. You won't regret it. But did John really know what he was getting himself into? Or was this seemingly innocent decision the first step into something much bigger, and maybe even dangerous? John wasn't the kind of guy who usually lost sleep over decisions. He had always believed that, in the end, things had a way of working themselves out. But that night was different. He tossed and turned in bed, restless, the untouched envelope still sitting on the kitchen table. What have I done? He murmured to himself, staring at the dark ceiling. It wasn't just the weight of the decision. It was the feeling that something bigger was coming, something he couldn't quite see. The next morning, John woke up before sunrise. He put on his work clothes as he always did, but there was something different in the air. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. When he arrived at Robert's company, an enormous glass and steel building gleaming under the weak morning sun, he felt a pang of nervousness. This wasn't his place. Or at least, it didn't feel like it. Inside, everything was clean, organized, almost sterile. People walked briskly, carrying folders and laptops like soldiers on a secret mission. John felt out of place, like a fish out of water. His boots were still dirty with soil, his shirt simple and unassuming, while everyone around him looked like they had stepped out of a corporate fashion catalog. Robert greeted him personally at the entrance. Welcome to your new life, he said, with that enigmatic smile that was already starting to get on John's nerves. Let's start with a quick meeting. The conference room was just as impressive as the rest of the building. Glass walls, black leather chairs, and a table so polished John could see his reflection in it. He sat down awkwardly, trying not to look out of place, as Robert explained the plan. You'll be leading a project called Roots. It's an initiative to help local communities through gardening and sustainability programs. Sounds like something you're familiar with, right? John blinked, surprised. Gardening, sustainability, that's incredible. A wave of relief mixed with excitement washed over him. Maybe this wasn't so strange after all. Maybe Robert really did understand what John had to offer. But then, Robert added, however, there's one condition. You have to follow our rules. No exceptions. Rules? What kind of rules? John frowned, suspicious. That weight was creeping back in, that feeling that not everything was as simple as it seemed. Basic rules. No talking to the press, no sharing project details with anyone outside the company. And, of course, you need to be willing to learn how things work around here. Robert paused, as if carefully selecting his next words. This isn't just about planting flowers, John. It's about changing lives. But to do that, you need to understand the game. Game? What game? John felt his stomach turn. He didn't like that word. Game implied tricks, hidden strategies, things he had never wanted to be part of. Robert chuckled softly, as if he knew exactly what John was thinking. Don't worry. You'll understand in time. For now, just trust me. Trust. That word again. John wanted to trust him. He really did. But something inside him whispered that this was more complicated than it seemed. He had accepted the challenge, even knowing he was stepping into unknown waters. The first few days on the job were a whirlwind. John met people who spoke in acronyms he had never heard before, sat through meetings where everyone talked at once, and tried to make sense of spreadsheets filled with numbers that meant nothing to him. It was like learning an entirely new language. But in the midst of all the chaos, something beautiful started to emerge. The Roots project was real. They started small, with a community garden in an underprivileged neighborhood. John got his hands back in the soil, teaching children and adults how to plant tomatoes, carrots, and herbs. He saw the spark in their eyes when they realized they could grow their own food. And in that moment, surrounded by plants and the laughter of children, John felt like maybe this could work. But of course, nothing was perfect. There were rumors floating through the company halls, whispers about the true purpose of the project. Some said it was just a front to boost the company's public image. Others suggested something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. John tried to ignore the gossip, but the words lingered in his mind like an annoying mosquito that wouldn't go away. One afternoon, after a long day, John came home to find an anonymous letter slipped under his door. The note simply read, "Be careful what you plant. Not all roots are good." He froze, gripping the crumpled paper in his hands. Who had written this? And what did it mean? That night, John couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, staring at the backyard where the helicopter had landed just days ago. The distant sound of crickets seemed to echo his doubts. He knew he had to make a decision, and soon. But what was the right choice? As he thought, John remembered something his grandfather used to say, "The earth doesn't lie. It gives you exactly what you plant." And in that moment, he realized that maybe that was the key to understanding everything. What was he planting here? And was he ready to reap whatever came next?